We are presenting on The Heat is On, and we are going to be focusing on fire damage in hotel properties. If you're joining us and you have a property outside of the industry, it'll still be relevant. We just may have some nuance or key statistics targeted specifically towards hotels and resorts, but it is definitely relevant kind of across the board. I'm Sarah Chadwick, Marketing Director with CRC. And for those of you who don't know, CRC is a national restoration reconstruction company. We are based out of Denver, and we specialize in large loss restoration, helping businesses recover from fires, water damage, storms, and more. Joining me today is Tyler Catrana, as you already mentioned, and I will turn it over to him to introduce himself.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Sarah. Again, my name is Tyler Catrana. I'm National Project Director with Commercial Restoration Company. We are a national general contractor and mitigation contractor dealing with fires, floods, and mold. And give a quick overview of the components of what we're going to be briefly touching on today. We'll be touching on why fire damage is critical concern for you guys in the industry and operators. We'll talk about the top 5 causes of fire. Understanding components in fire damage, how we remediate them, and what that may, how that may affect how we remediate it and what you do with your property in the future. And that includes that fire damage restoration process. We also have compliance and claims management that we get into on large loss. That if it's a large enough loss in this day and age, insurance may be a component. We'll talk about that claims management, compliance, and health and safety. So. Without that, we'll keep moving forward and discuss why fire damage is of a critical concern. So fire damage in hospitality settings not only can be an issue with guest safety and life safety, which is a main component, ultimately what we call heads and beds. It's a financial loss and it could cause reputation damage if you are a franchisee. Obviously, hotel fires get a lot of play in the media. And so how we react to it and how you get this done and getting that asset taken care of is of critical importance, not only financially, but again, for the reputation of the building. You need to think about closures of the rooms, guest displacement, lost revenue, knowing what your restoration process is going to be, and simple things that we can do and put into place to minimize that business interruption is going to be critical. And we'll go ahead and go into these components. But while we're looking at this slide here, highlighting fire incidents in hotels and motels, I thought was fairly interesting. You had 6,436 hotel and motel fires, an average of $164 million in property losses, 141 injuries and 13 deaths. So anytime we can minimize any of these items, we can. The good news is a lot of these statistics are starting to go down as we get into automated building systems. So if you are an operator, that's another component you may want to start exploring, is building automation and systems that may reduce your risk. More building automate, you have some of these different systems, they may cause some other component issues that it's a cause and effect item, so that you may have other components that we need to look at once you start implementing systems like that. Top causes of fires in the hospitality properties, I thought this was very interesting. 55% of fires in the hospitality industry are caused by the kitchen. So if you have a hotel, motel, something along those lines that has these kitchen components, whether it be an oven, stove, microwave, that is our biggest fire component and causation of fire. Then we get to appliances, that's 8.4%. Heating is 7.3%. Electrical malfunctions are about 5% of all fires, and intentional is about 4%. So it runs the gamut as far as what's there, but generally speaking, the kitchen components are the biggest fire-related issues that we run into or we see. Fires are steady throughout the year. There's a slight peak in fires for your hotel properties and around in January, and then obviously the time frame for fires is roughly, it peaks about 20% of fires between the hours of 6 and 9, and then 8 and 10 a.m. So that tracks with kitchens, people cooking things going on there. So always something if your operations are moving forward, just some some general facts that you can look at and understand that those are your top time frames and what you should be looking at and what you need to maybe maintain and again, keep clean moving forward on those kitchen components in talking to your guests and expectations with what you present with your guests. Let's go ahead and talk about the components of fire damage, the impacts of fire, smoke, and soot, and fire suppression systems that are used to put it out, water suppression systems, different things. So the first one we'll get into is flames and heat. Probably the most obvious for any type of damage. Obviously, it's burned components, structural weakening. What it melts causes additional damage, and we'll get into smoke and soot and some of that. Expansion and warping causes materials deformation. And again, each one of these has a secondary component that may affect adjoining buildings, adjoining rooms, and some unforeseen damages as you move forward. Combustion, we obviously know from a combustion standpoint, it's igniting surrounding materials. This is going to cause, again, flames and heat going to cause a large amount of structural and more direct surface damage. However, and pervasive is going to be smoke. It starts off with surface staining. It can adhere to walls, ceilings, contents. It's going to leave a residue or discoloration on surfaces. Smoke itself many times is acidic, and it causes damage to metals and electronics. So if you have your TVs, electronic components, printers, anything like that, that smoke is going to get into the electronics and could cause general component damage as far as your FF&E is concerned. Obviously, smoke, particulates in the air is hazardous to breathe in. When we're mitigating it, we want to make sure our teams are with PPE and around doing it correctly. If your individual workers are coming in after the fact, you need to have a PPE component, but respiratory and health issues are a main concern. And this goes beyond after just the fire. If you do have a component of the building that you can open back up for business, but maybe keep the other sections shut down, how we clean that smoke and soot is going to be of critical importance to make sure from a liability standpoint, you protect your guests and what their expectations are as well. Along with smoke, when we have incomplete combustion, we get into soot. So it generally leaves a black and oily residue on walls and furnishings. If you look at the picture there, we've got some soot damage, we've got ash and ember damage on incomplete combustion. Again, just like smoke, it can be acidic, it presents health risks. Irritates respiratory systems. It can be a fire hazard if we think about what is partially burned or in there. Some of that soot, if it remains, keeps a heat component, a reignition of certain surfaces can take place. But the main differences between soot has that a little bit larger particulate matter and is perhaps greasy and oily, as we discussed. Smoke is a gaseous byproduct with particulates and chemicals. So anything that we're burning and starts to burn, we have to think about the components of what is burning. It has oil byproducts, fibrous material. The actual building materials themselves can pose a risk as far as if it's an old enough building, what building materials were used. When we damage drywall and surfaces, some of those drywall surfaces can contain asbestos containing materials and fibers. So anytime we start making things friable, what we call friable or airborne, that includes in fire damage, soot, and smoke, then we have to be cognizant of where that's flowing throughout the building. And this presents its own difficulty in cleaning, intensive cleaning and regulated cleaning on where this goes. I'm going to go ahead and jump into third-party testing. If you do experience a large loss from a fire component, your restorer, seriously, we will get involved, and to a certain extent, we're going to follow where that smoke and soot goes down the building. However, from a liability standpoint, you certainly need to understand that you want to know exactly where that goes. A third-party hygienist is usually recommended in a hotel setting for that liabilities reasons. You're going to have a third-party industrial hygienist test all the surfaces and where that smoke may have gone into systems, and they're going to write a protocol on how that should be cleaned or if it's going to be removed, and the restorer can then take care of all these components in a safe and proper manner. But on the flip side, a clearance will be done at the end. When the reconstruction process starts, it's assured that all the cleaning, all the smoke, all the soot is taken care of. Insurance companies sometimes rely on restorers to do some of this testing. However, I'm going to recommend that anybody out there and with your hotel that we get a little bit more stringent upon testing and clearances to protect your liabilities and the liabilities of your individuals and guests that you have at your hotel.
Hey, Tyler, real quick before we jump into water. So looking at the picture, if someone were to say, hey, can't you just clean that couch? Can we save it? What would you say?
I would certainly say no in this instance. A lot of times just on light smoke damage, if there's been a third-party testing done and we don't have, let's say, an additional asbestos component or something that's become friable in the air on those porous, non-porous surface. Most of the time, porous surfaces, couches and everything like that, even if it's a smaller fire damage, are removed and thrown out. It's just not cost effective necessarily to clean those. If it's a non-porous surface, a lot of times they can be cleaned, but we'll look to a hygienist to look for that. Also keep in mind the type of smoke damage. When you see a forest fire smoke damage, a lot of times people will look at it and go, oh, well, why is it kind of white smoke kind of coming out? Well, it's mostly complete combustion that's going on. So you don't have these heavy particulates, oil-based products burning. When you have a structure fire, a lot of times you see a structure fire, the smoke coming from a structure fire is black or brown, heavy, because it's incomplete combustion. It picks up a lot more contaminants. So there is a difference between the two. A lot of times we can look at it from a smoke component. We may be able to save more things from a forest fire and ancillary smoke damage from a forest fire and be able to clean stuff more effectively, even contents, than incomplete combustion and building materials and different things that pick up a lot more contaminants. So it is a component to keep in mind, especially these resorts. And if you're an operator from a resort area, recently California, obviously Yellowstone, anything like that, where we have resorts that are affected by wildfire, sometimes it is a little bit different than, again, that structure fire. But something always to keep in mind. But I appreciate the input and the questions.
Moving on to water.
Perfect. So water. A lot of you guys have already had water classes. So one of the bigger components of fire damage, if there's a smaller fire in your structure, is then how they put it out, the fire suppression systems and what's involved. You can obviously see the picture here. That is a 4-foot run of assumed microbial growth up the wall. We say assumed microbial growth because unless I'm a hygienist, I don't put even though it seems obvious, and if it smells walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's usually a duck. But we do usually integrate a third-party hygienist to do any type of testing as far as what materials are taken out. Obviously, the water line, either by wicking action, has gone up the wall and into the wall, or maybe the insulation inside the wall is affected and acting like a sponge and holding water in there. So for the most part, this is a pretty hefty mold damage top down. Obviously, we can see the tiles, the wall, all that stuff would typically be coming out. You may be able to save some drywall, but at some point in time, law of diminishing returns. Cleaning, we need drying and dehumidification. Obviously, when a fire suppression system goes off or firefighting efforts with water is taking place, it's going to affect floors coming down. So the direct fire affected area may be relatively small. However, the water component coming down, building structures into basements, anything like that can be heavy and extensive, and it requires moisture mapping and what we're going to be taking out and the type of component. We view this as a Category 3 loss, the water that comes from fire suppression systems or firefighting efforts, because it is picking up contaminants. So that again applies to what we're taking care of when we have a fire or in a structural fire. Fire suppression chemical systems. If you have a restaurant in your hotel, sometimes you will have a halon or basically a gaseous system. Those are effective and usually use less or cause less damage when they are put off. But again, cleaning the surfaces and getting back to a food ready condition is important. We have fire suppression systems that most of your lines and most hotels have a regular water suppression system that goes off when the bulb is broken and heated. Keep in mind that a lot of the water is sitting in those lines. You flush those at least once or twice a year. But if they're cast iron pipes, usually it picks up rust. If you've ever seen a fire suppression system go off and it hasn't been drained lately, that water coming out will be black coming out for the first several seconds, if not 5 to 10 seconds, because it's flushing out contaminants that it's all picked up. In colder climates, you might have a glycol system. And the glycol systems, if it has some oil, it feels like oil. Be very careful if these go off, as when you walk over the area, it becomes a trip and slip hazard. For anybody that's remediating the conditions, it also affects how us remediators come in. Most of the components, once a glycol system comes out, we are not trying to dry anything in place. We're not trying to, it's all coming out because that oil gets into the drywall paper backing, promotes microbial growth. It can have strong smells if these go off. So if even it goes off to a certain area of your hotel, other areas may experience just the smells and everything going on. So containment of the areas on anything that we do, if you're still going to have guests in the building and allow guests in there, life safety is going to come into play. Negative pressure inside there to keep smells and different things down is going to come into play. So containment, contain, map, and then we start to do map and hygienist protocols, and then we start that mitigation process. I've touched a little bit on asbestos containing materials. When you have a fire and the firefighting efforts, not only the fire, but the fire department can start breaking in and breaking down certain materials. We find asbestos containing materials in drywall mud. And so when it becomes friable, so in a particulate or crushed or burned, it can release a lot of those asbestos fibers into the air. Why it's critically important to have testing when you first come in by a third-party hygienist that identifies the bulk material that has maybe been burned or damaged. And then if you find that it has asbestos containing materials or that smoke and soot, and you're tracing that where that might have progressed to, then you're going to get that testing, further testing where that smoke may go, make sure that smoke that has trailed down the hallway does not now contain friable asbestos particulate material. Think beyond just the fire, the direct fire affected area. Think beyond that all the way down hallways, different things, air conditioning, HVAC systems, and work closely with that third-party hygienist and your restorer to know exactly what the protocol is going to be in order to take care of this. If you do find ACM, it's containing the area. All different states have different regulations on how that's regulated, how that's done, what contractors are allowed to perform, what they're not, what you as a hotel operator on little small damages, what you can participate in and what you can. So it varies a lot. We could jump down that rabbit hole and spend another 2 hours talking about ACM, but that's another time. Let's go ahead and move forward. We'll do the challenges in hospitality and fire restoration. First and foremost, we always want to say guest and staff safety is going to be of utmost importance for everyone. Understanding when you have a loss, when's it time to say when, and a good responsible restorer, general contractor, somebody that deals in this space is going to assist you in just saying, hey, you really can't, maybe you need to shut down. Maybe you need to make the hard decision on what you're going to be doing, how you're going to be affecting all this. High traffic areas, kitchens, lobbies, guest rooms that complicate the cleanup. You need egress and life safety measures in place that are not compromised. So means of egress for your guests, if we lose half a building, how are they getting out in case there was another fire, another emergency, if you're going to be open? Prioritizing that guest safety is going to be tantamount to what you do and what you really need to shut down and what you don't. A lot of times we see staff safety. I see this a lot where building engineers and everything, they have the best interest of the building and everything at heart, but maybe don't understand some of the components and what they may be exposing themselves to. So at very minimum, a PPE, if you're going to start getting involved, if there's structural damage or anything like that, stay out of that until it's assessed by a structural engineer or comfort of assessment from several different sources and figuring out if it's safe to even enter the area and what you need to do from there.
Tyler, can you, since we're dealing with fires and say the sprinklers went off and maybe they're having to be fixed, so they're not operational, and kind of what triggers a fire watch and what goes into that?
That's a great question. So many times a fire suppression system that has gone off, it's going to take several days or something to be repaired, or the heads that have gone off or anything. the system may need to be isolated so you can get water in maybe still an occupied area. Usually, if your fire suppression and or your alarm system has been damaged or gone off, and your fire suppression system is not operational in a specific area, if you are going to have guests, and this is going to be up to the fire department, really, they're going to be involved either way. They may say, hey, you can't operate, or okay, you have limited operation, but you have to have fire watch. So that's 24-hour, somebody coming in, logging every hour, walking continuously. It's an additional expense. But if it keeps your business up and running, it sometimes is an option to have fire watch done. In guest rooms, it becomes a little bit more difficult because the guest rooms aren't open for that fire watch there. So there's some different components there. I would recommend anybody that's going to go down that route, and your restorer can obviously help you out, is to talk to the fire department, come to an agreement with them and your own liabilities and risk managers for your company individually on what you really want to do and take care of it. Sometimes it just doesn't make fiscal sense to stay open. Sometimes it'll go faster to get everybody out of the way and get this going. So I think that's it, there's a little bit more there for discussion, site specific. But I think there was a question. Was there a question, Sarah?
No, just a comment. Said,
Okay.
keep a stash of spare sprinkler heads available on site to help minimize downtime.
That's you're 100% right. There's a couple of tools, specialty tools. If one sprinkler head goes off, shotgun was one of them that you can actually get up there, kind of shut it off from a maintenance component. There's some really cool stuff in the market to help you guys minimize just sprinkler head discharge on single levels if it's not a big fire or something or a component like that. But that's a great point for whoever was commenting on that in kind. But yeah, some sprinkler heads to get in there, get done. And how you manage that with your own fire suppression contractor that takes care of your stuff and your fire alarms as well. Service disruption. So especially if you have a kitchen and and you have food service, if you have a high-end restaurant in the bottom of your hotel, and that's done. I had one out in Las Vegas a few years back. They really didn't want to shut down their kitchen. We had a lot of stuff that was going on there. Understand that there's a lot of options, and if you have a national restorer that deals with this component wise, believe it or not, there's options for temporary kitchens, temporary services, wash stations, bathrooms. We actually set up a full operational kitchen with refrigerated units and different things so that they still could operate. Again, maybe not the best. It depends on what you see and what the visibility is for that. But there are options to limit service disruption. Obviously, you have guest displacement, alternative accommodations where you're losing guests. Have that plan in place, which you guys are doing. I would encourage always that. This revenue loss, it's heads and beds, as we said. The faster we can get these things done, the better it's going to end up for you, your guests, and your revenue stream. You have that reputation risk, so what we can do to minimize access and different things we'll certainly want to do. And if you have a media outlet, you'll probably want to be able to talk, and I'm sure most risk individuals can take care of that, because nobody, as far as the media is concerned, nobody likes a fire in a hotel more than the media. So if you limit that usually can help out quite a bit. Mechanical MEP systems, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. We're getting into kind of rebuild portion once we start stripping this out. That's a little bit what this picture is showing. If we've broken it down to actual structure, components, electrical exposure, anything like that. Obviously, the HVAC systems can be damaged from smoke, soot, and odors. Electrical. If you have armored MC, which is your electrical wire armored in metal tubing, though the electrical may not be affected as much, if there's a heavy suppression systems going off, that the armored MC can actually hold water and pose an electrical risk. Also during a fire, the heat against the copper on lines tends to expand or contract on the wire and can pull against electrical boxes, anything like that. So at very minimum, MAGO test, end-to-end testing, continuity testing for electrical. And again, we get into design. We're going to design build facets and what we need to do as far as your regulations with municipalities and how we progress with the municipality. Complex layouts, You may have an older building that now, once we get to a permitting process, you may need to upgrade on a code upgrade, whether it be ADA requirements, electrical requirements, energy requirements, and we'll get into this here in a minute as far as lead times and everything like that, can cause a serious disruption in your time frame from fire to reconstruction. So it's not going to be a fast process necessarily. It's one of the most frustrating components of what we do when we start rebuilding after a fire, when we start looking into code and ordinance items. Usually your risk managers and everybody, you have a code and ordinance bucket, a separate portion of coverage on insurance that goes into ordinance and law on something like that. We can get into that on lead times a little bit more and discuss, which I think is our next slide. So going into that, one of the biggest components or the single biggest component of rebuilding is obviously working with municipalities, their required plans that may be in place. And it could be weeks or even months of plan review on the construction side. So the fire takes place, we get it out, we mitigate it, strip it down, isolate, get temporary services going, say half your hotel is going. It seems like, hey, the natural progression, hey, we're just going to get in here, start. Your municipality, your city, state regulations are going to slow this process down. It's probably the most frustrating part because you look at it and you just go, I can move forward with this. We're done with this portion. Let's just get this heads in beds. We can't, unfortunately, make the cities go any faster on review. And a lot of times we need to have a design team. Most municipalities require stamped drawings, which means there could be obviously a structural engineer for structural fire, an architect to do code review and analysis, cover sheets, anything like that. I will also say, from your insurance side, a lot of times they say, and I want everybody to pay attention to this, your carrier, if it's an insurance loss, will bring out an engineer. That engineer typically, 95% of the time, is not a structural engineer to put your plans back together and go. It is a forensic engineer that's checking a box for the carrier on what's going on. The adept adjusters in the field know, especially if it's a larger fire or structural, they're immediately going to try to help you engage and engage a structural engineer that's going to put the plans together that the actual contractor, your remediator is going to need. Nothing is more worthless to us from a contractor standpoint than a forensic engineer's report saying, this is how the fire started. It doesn't do us any good. It doesn't get you through municipality. If you're waiting for a couple weeks and somebody's told you, and sometimes they just don't know what they don't know. And they've told you, oh, well, we have an engineer coming out. Well, what is the engineer actually for? Well, you need to qualify that because sometimes they just don't know what they don't know of what the municipality requires. So work with your restorer, work with your contractor in making sure he's getting what he needs in order to pull the permits, because that can be a major delay moving forward. The second biggest delay we get into is FF&E. When we get into furniture, wallpaper, a lot of you guys use Gettys or something along those on your design facets. You have a design standard. Sometimes wallpaper is 6 months out. Sometimes your furniture is 6 months out, special order items. So know what your component items are, know what your lead times are. It might be a good thing just on an annual basis, knowing what those are. Check your attic stock if you have wallpaper or anything like that. We can mitigate some of that. We'll paint the wall temporarily to what wallpaper looks like. Your guests generally aren't going to know. Move that forward, and then 6 months later when wallpaper comes in, we'll come back and wallpaper it. But keep in mind that FF&E component can be extremely lengthy. A lot of stuff's coming from China, anything like that. We've got geopolitical issues going on right now, and how that's coming across as far as expenditure and time frames as well. So we'll work with your people to facilitate that as soon as possible in moving that forward. Materials lead times, permits, and engineering plans are the biggest delay in what we see in projects, major projects, and getting these taken care of. All right, rebuilding after your damage. Fire damage restoration process, inspection and assessment. Your restorer is going to come out. We're going to assess generally site. It's going to be limited generally to a visual inspection. If we have big, as we spoke about, smoke travel areas and what we're looking at, We typically want, for liabilities of your sake and our sake, a third-party hygienist to go ahead and do some testing, get a protocol. Again, asbestos testing, smoke and soot protocol, damage assessment, then obviously structural engineering and planning. That's all can kind of go simultaneously as you're getting on site, moving forward with the mitigation process. And ahead of that, even, okay, obviously secure the property. We were talking about containment, contain, get into not having secondary damages, water removal on different floors coming down, affected materials removal, any of those things. We're going to be moving forward pretty quick on that process. Smoke and soot removal, again, going into that mitigation process, get into that cleaning and sanitizing stage for the structure itself and the reconstruction. Again, why I almost said at the very beginning, assessment and everything like that. We did a interesting project out in California on a major fire in a warehouse, an active warehouse. The adjuster knew exactly that, and that Sunday morning, it happened on a Friday. That Sunday morning, our whole team was assembled out there. When it was released by the city, there was no work obviously going on there. She had the team together with engineers, consultants, and engineers. When I say engineers, structural engineers, to actually start the planning process and move that forward. So I always put that as almost number one when I just commented on that, of what we can do to truncate that time frame, is start that process as soon as you possibly can on the trades that you need and the professionals you need out there to get this, to minimize your business interruption. It's a huge component, because once we get all the way through this, let's say it takes 10 days to get all the way, 10, 15 days even, it's a large loss, something like that happens. If you just end at number 6 and you go, okay, well now I need plans and all that sort of stuff, you've lost several weeks. Could have been used for that design phase and getting you there for permitting processes and different things like that. So I truncate this whole item from when we get to reconstruction. I want design out there almost immediately if we know that there's a design and engineering process that needs to take place. It's critically important. Along with your FF&E, then get into that. We'll do that within days of the loss rather than waiting for everything to be cleaned and done. Compliance and claims management. This gets into what we're going to be required from the municipality side, the documentation on what we need for if it is an insurance claim. If you see the slide up there right now, that's what we call a daily field report. Our teams are required to put something together like this every day, get it off to a project director. This is a legal document. It helps us, and it helps the process for anybody that you need to inform, including the insurance company, in knowing what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're doing it, and what it looks like. It really gives you a progress on what's going on site, and is critically important for management of the claim, for any of you in hospitality, how you're going to manage the rooms and what needs to take place. Any of that documentation is going to streamline the claims process. This is why it's important to have one that's familiar with the insurance process if it is going to be an insurance claim. And a lot of times a regular general contractor, local general contractor, they don't work in the insurance world, and they fail to provide a lot of proper documentation throughout the process, and it extends your claims process and creates issues on the back end of payments and different things that are coming out. Collaboration, working with the carrier, consultants, adjusters, restoration experts, engineers, architects, and your team to make it most effective to minimize that business interruption is critically important as well. Takeaways in hospitality or anywhere, right? It involves fire, smoke, soot, and water. The faster we can move on all the components and assess what those component needs are, it's going to minimize that downtime and ultimately minimize your revenue loss. Your preventative measures and maintenance are critical. We obviously looked at the components of when fires take place, what you have, what is in your facility, and how you can maybe minimize that risk, or understand at least where that majority of risk comes from, and see what processes in place that you can minimize the chances of a fire.
And we've had a quiet bunch up until now, but we will open it up to any questions. And part of the registration process, we did ask if you had any questions. So kind of if you think of any, go ahead and put them in the chat or raise your hand. You can ask them live, but I will get started with a few that we did receive during the registration process. And some of them, I guess, without some context, is up to Tyler and myself to interpret. So
This could be fun.
The first one is, what is considered a total loss? And I know that one could be open up a whole can of worms, but maybe to think about it in terms of fires and what might you be able to restore, or what might, from a structural standpoint, you come in and say, nope, this actually needs to be demolished and ground up new build.
The first thing I'm always going to say is once we get into an actual ground, what we call a grounder or something like that, multiple facets are going to come together on a structural engineer. I'm going to leave it up. Sometimes we just need to be the dumb contractor and say, hey, you know what, if this is that component. A lot of times we can look at it there. I recently had a project that I had one restorer kind of saying, oh, well, I think we need to knock down all these walls. I took an opposing opinion and said, I think we could effectively do this, this, and this. We ended up going that way, and it got a blessing from the engineer, but ultimately I'm gonna go to a person with a stamp to say, hey, this is a total loss on structure. As far as components burned, a lot of porous materials, if we're talking about contents or anything like that, a lot of it boils down to cost. Is it effective to restore, or is it effective to again remove and replace? Yeah, that's a dangerous question. I would like to see more context on really that question on what they're meaning by what is a total loss when we just jump in. But very rarely do I just jump in and go, total loss, we're knocking it all down, we're out of here. But because all those components come into play, whether it be asbestos testing, water damage combined with your smoke, soot, and fire damage as well.
Next one is, what's the impact of standing water damage? This is another one we kind of talked back and forth in our planning for this.
Yeah, so what's the impacts of standing water damage? The obvious is obviously wicking action, water damage coming up. Secondary damage is even condensating of that water to other surfaces from differential air temperature and evaporation and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if maybe this person is thinking hydrostatic pressure, because we can get obviously into some very serious, if we're dumping 40,000 gallons of water on a major loss, and it gets into a basement and fills up a basement, you could literally get to a point where there could be foundation structural failures. And I've seen full basements filled up full of water, shifting of the soils because of all that. So not 100% sure what they're asking, but yeah, that runs the gamut of obviously water damage, mold, mold, secondary damages, electrical issues, anything like that. But it could get all the way to the water causing a structural issue as well.
Yeah. I just thought, hey, I just thought I'd sort of put, so my name's Charlotte. I actually work in the insurance industry, and saw a lot of, hotels, residentials, and I've also got a background in risk engineering. So I've this has been really interesting for me. And I just thought maybe it might be helpful to put a bit of an insurance perspective on standing water, if that's okay.
Sure.
Please.
So sometimes we find you don't need a lot of water to create a massive loss in like a hotel or something. You only need like a couple of inches. Once that water has been standing there for a set period of time, which might be say 24 hours normally, that would then be considered a total loss of all soft furnishings in that area. So you might be losing your sofas, your curtains, your window furnishings, your carpets. And then also, if you are a hotel that has got matching curtains throughout or matching carpets throughout all of your floors, and it's been designed and it's a one-off, bespoke, the insurer may end up having to replace all of those soft furnishings throughout the hotel, even if there is no actual water damage to them because they're on another floor, but because it's considered matching pair and sets in terms of the actual policy details, you can end up with a very, very big loss, even though you might only have a relatively small damage area, if that makes sense. So that's kind of something to consider as well in terms of damage.
I appreciate your input, and you're 100% right. A lot of times we walk into loss and somebody goes, oh, well, this isn't that big a deal, to your point. and we start looking at something like this, and obviously you're referring to as far as a smaller amount of water, but even if it's a couple inches, if we're utilizing the IICRC standards, there's what's called, there's the three categories of water, 1, 2, and 3, and normally water damages we're dealing with are considered Cat 2 and then Cat 3 on a fire damage, but there's amplification and how long that sits. So you're 100% right. I appreciate you bringing that up. It is critically important to kind of see what those components are, how it's affected, secondary damages, and yeah, I won't ever speak to policy. That's going to be up to you and your carriers as far as what you guys are covering outside the realm of the affected area. But you are 100% right. It could get into, I mean, runs of carpet are very common. We get into an area that has to come out, you can't match that run, and it's 100 feet down the hallway, and now we're replacing all the way down, and inside rooms or different things like that. But different carriers, different strokes, different folks, but you're 100% right. These tend to be a greater loss than your typical multifamily or something along those lines. It's liabilities. You're right as far as aesthetics and anything like that. And I would say everybody on their carrier risk needs to talk, and their policy will dictate what's there. So I very much appreciate you bringing that up.
All right, thank you.
All right, next question. What are some common types of hidden damage after a fire that might be overlooked?
I think I brought up I see a lot of the electrical damage it's not thought of sometimes with armored MC, those wires, penetrations, different things being filled up with water that could cause shorts. Now we get into code and ordinance issues too. Those times, obviously, they're not maybe necessarily obvious until we get in there with the municipalities. If anybody we can jump down this rabbit hole too is familiar with SDS, severe structural damage, SSD. There's some rules that if a percentage of the building is affected, then the entire building is looked at from, even not affected areas are looked at from a code and ordinance standpoint. Our guest was speaking previously about just water. There's another component to the structural side that most or a lot of municipalities have what's called SSD rules and regulations, that 25% of the structure is affected, or some percentage thereof. They're different in different areas, but the entire building may be assessed. So that could be a huge component, whether it be fire alarms, egress, ADA that you're reviewing that has to be done. Even down to striping of the parking lot, how many bathrooms you have. If they start looking at the entire component or building envelope, that can really cause some issues. That's pulling a firearm. That's no pun intended. That's a severe. That's at the one end of the spectrum. That can be severe, but we have seen it before where they start playing into municipalities and code and ordinance items. So I think those are two big ones: electrical, some of the MEP upgrades, systems. So your mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and code and ordinance. Those are the biggest components that obviously from a fire you're not going to necessarily see, but you have to dig in, do your discovery, and it could affect multiple areas outside the affected area.
Kind of getting close to time, so I'll kind of finish on one question here as we are getting close into wildfire season, touching on some of the differences maybe between, we've kind of been focusing on, I don't want to say general because no fire is a general, but structure fires compared to a wildfire, and what some differences might be there.
So I think I briefly touched on some incomplete combustion aspects of the fire, how that affects the components of smoke, soot, how the building's affected. Obviously, a forest fire is from outside in. Usually we have structure fires are out inside the building and out. So how we clean it and what needs to be done. One of the biggest components we see in a fire area, say Palisades or something like that just took place in California, is on strip malls, different areas. It could be a mile or two away, but the heat of the forest fire and everything is carrying embers. It could be miles, big chunks, and you'd be surprised the chunks we see on top of roofs, flat roofs. And so if you're affected and your hotel is affected or your hospitality unit is affected and it's a forest fire a mile or two away and you go, it's all right. It's probably good to get some assessment done because there's been roofs being replaced out there in California right now that were miles away from the fire that burned embers through TPOs. And suddenly, as it rained, they're getting leaks everywhere. It was actually fire damage. It was caused by the fire damage. Wildfires also, you have to think of, it's burning components, perhaps vehicles, different things like that. And in California specifically, what they were dealing with out there was heavy metals, soils contamination, asbestos contamination. Again, all your contaminants getting in the soil and what you're doing with topsoil and different things. So it could be then another component of what you're taking care of or what regulations are coming to bear. FEMA in California has taken a big portion of those issues, and the municipalities do a lot of exterior items. One thing I will say is once you have a named loss, a named peril, so let's say the fires in California, and it stripped all the vegetation. This has been a hot button issue lately, is stripped all the vegetation, and then they had heavy rains, and now mud and different things came into a property. There's some hot debate going on, well, now the named peril was actually the fire that caused the stripping of the soils, that caused that. So normally everybody goes, oh, well, that's flood waters, and that's not covered. And there's a whole component going on there. So the insurance world is fascinating, and I'm not going to speak again to coverage, but there's a lot of differences from exterior fires, forest fires, and what they present to interior fires and what we have. So maybe that briefly covered it. I'll go to the 50,000 foot level there.
Yeah, maybe just a reminder that in a wildfire scenario, you're dealing with a catastrophe, and so services that might be readily available suddenly become high demand.
And it's going to take some time getting mobilization, even if water, again, they restrict access in what you're doing. So you'll have to assess your current situation and what's going on and what the municipalities are allowing anyways, and what resources you even have available. And that includes building components, lead time items for, let's say, RTUs. Any of your building components have gone up exponentially here in the last 6 to 8 months.
And then last one, just touch on briefly, since we talked a lot about the fire happening to our own building or maybe from a wildfire, but let's say it's a neighboring building, I guess could be one of yours, could be a different businesses, but the impacts of kind of a neighboring person's fire, maybe on the exterior of your building, what that might do.
Sure. So site assessments a lot of times are being done. Keep in mind that heat, your windows aren't generally designed for as much heat as it's going to get from a building possibly adjoining another adjoining building. It can crack the seals, discolor the paint, window panes, obviously siding, roofing. If it gets hot I had a fire damage here recently, and the adjoining building, embers got on it again, as we talked about, started melting up the roof, and we ended up replacing about 10 squares of adjoining roofing just from the heat damage and some embers. Yeah, always assess and look at it. Make sure you're looking at it with eyes wide open and what needs to be done. It's really tough to open a claim later if you don't try to capture everything at that time. So we want to be very thorough about what's going on.
All right, thanks. And with that, we will wrap up our session today. So thanks again to everybody who joined us, and thanks, Tyler, for sharing all of your knowledge with us and making us a little bit smarter about fire damage in hotels and resorts.
We appreciate everybody joining us. Thank you so much. If you have other questions, concerns, please reach out to CRC, myself. I'd be happy to answer additional questions or take sidebars with anybody as well. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Sarah, thanks for your help.